To the outside world, Brazil traditionally looks something like this. But look closer, and today you'll see a very different Brazil. A Brazil that, by selling everything from soya to cars to flip-flops, has doubled its exports in the space of a decade. A Brazil that aggressively targets new markets like India and China. A Brazil that has, perhaps for the first time, arrived on the world stage.
This is the result of years of rebuilding the Brazilian economy. First, agriculture. See, we have now good technology. Secondly, if you look at Brazilian's exports, more than 50%, about 60%, is composed by manufacturers. We are exporting aircraft, we are exporting cell phones, we are exporting different things. Why? Because of the capacity we had to produce that. We have good technology, we have people.
It's 2 years since President Cardoso handed over the reins of power to Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, known here simply as Lula. His government made a strategic decision to translate Brazil's economic bulk into political muscle.
We always thought that Brazil was, let us say, below its category in a way, acting in the international field below the category to which it can belong. We always follow the principle of non-intervention, and I think that's good, but we have to combine that with non-indifference. So if there are situations in which we can have a positive role without, of course, meddling in internal things, we are doing that.
The most immediate example of that is Haiti, where Brazil is leading the United Nations peacekeeping force. It's the largest foreign deployment of Brazilian soldiers since the Second World War. In recent months, they've been increasingly stretched by an upsurge in violence, prompting an urgent appeal for other countries to send more peacekeepers. But just by being in Haiti, the Brazilians are building up credit with powerful friends.
Brazil's efforts in that regard are very, very welcome by the United States. The Haitians are wild about Brazil. They love everything about Brazil and therefore are sympathetic to the efforts that Brazil is making. That doesn't make Brazil's job any easier. PKO, peacekeeping operations, are complicated no matter where they are in the world. And I think Brazil is finding that out. But that's the price of leadership.
At times, Brazil's leadership ambitions have brought it into direct conflict with more established powers. At the World Trade Organization, it challenged and defeated the United States over the legality of subsidies paid to American cotton farmers. A second victory followed over the European Union on the issue of sugar. Most dramatically of all, the Brazilians led a revolt by developing nations at the Cancun meeting of the WTO, insisting any future trade deal hinged on concessions by rich countries on the issue of farm subsidies.
Cancun was a shock, if you like, to the negotiating process, which one had been used to up until then in the WTO and before that in the GATT. But I think fundamentally, we can look back now and say it was a healthy shock. Why a healthy shock? I think a healthy shock because it made clear that there was a very strong developing country voice being led by Brazil, in particular on agriculture, but also on other issues, which was not going to be ignored.
The roots of this new Brazilian activism can be found in the state of Pernambuco, in the poverty-stricken northeast of the country. It was here that President Lula was born. This is where the family home once stood. Heraldo Ferreira Santos understands as well as anyone how this land shaped Lula's political development. He's the president's cousin.
Era uma vida hostil, de muita dificuldade, né? Um cenário de fome, podemos dizer, né? Atribui a fome quando as pessoas não têm os alimentos necessários para se manter de uma forma saudável, nutritiva, né? Não é uma fome absoluta, mas relativa.
Bill Clinton famously said that he felt people's pain. Well, you could say that President Lula has lived people's pain. This was his home until the age of 7. He was brought up by his mother after his father walked out on the family. And really it's the memory of poverty and at times hunger here that underpins his whole approach to politics. So when Lula talks of poverty and hunger as the real weapons of mass destruction, foreign governments listen. More than 100 have backed his proposed Zero Hunger Fund, which he says could include a global tax on arms sales or financial transactions. But for some, the detail of the plan is too controversial.
What we cannot support are what appear to be at this stage certain parts of that proposal with regards to international taxation. For example, we had a revolution in 1776 against England because of taxation on an international basis, taxation without representation. Therefore, one of the components of Lula's Zero Hunger program is that there be an international taxation component, which we cannot have in the United States.
Brazil may never be the biggest fish in the pond, but within the Zen-like surroundings of the Foreign Ministry, there's nonetheless a quiet confidence developing. The immediate policy goal is a permanent seat on an expanded United Nations Security Council. Britain is formally supporting Brazil's candidacy, as are Germany, Japan and India, who are themselves also seeking a permanent seat.
The most important asset that we have is the fact that we have 10 neighbors and we haven't had a war for almost 140 years. I think very few countries can claim that. And I think that shows the strength and the authenticity of our belief in diplomatic means to solve political questions.
And how close do you think you are to getting this permanent seat on the Security Council?
Well, closer than we have ever been, but that doesn't, I cannot measure that in absolute terms because, you know, it's a very difficult proposition. But I think there is more and more the feeling that the reform has to happen, and to be real, it has to increase the number of permanent members. And if this is the case, then Brazil is very well placed.
This is a nation that's seen many false dawns. There's even a saying that Brazil is the country of the future and always will be. But from trade to peacekeeping to simply making its voice heard, there's a feeling that this time things are different, that Brazil's future has finally arrived.